Hey guys, Jay here. You may be somewhat lucky on test day and get a single line graph for your IELTS academic writing task 1. It would look something like this. This is not without its difficulties though. It's quite a confusing thing to look at. It looks like, I don't know, streamers. First thing you need to do before you start writing is you need to analyze this. You need to understand it. You need to really totally understand it. You need to pick out the most interesting points to write about. Okay, let's first read the description, which says the graph below shows the proportion of the labor force by employment in the USA between 1930 and 2010. All right, fine. The proportion of the labor force by employment. Let's work out what this means. So here on the y-axis, we've got the percentage term. So you can see here, for example, this dark blue line, which was farming, fishing, and industry, accounted for 70% of employment in 1930. In 1940, you can see it was starting to decrease. You could start to see that other services had increased somewhat, for example. And you can see that, let's go ahead and look at this green line here, because in like 1967 or something like that, the green line, which is industrial, started to increase quite rapidly, okay? And then that plateaued, say, in 1990. And you can also see, let's go back to the dark blue line, that farming, fishing, and forestry started to really plummet. When was this? In about 1970. And in fact, by 2010 was the lowest of all the employment, all the jobs. Now, what about this line here, this dark green line, technical? Well, in about 1990, we can assume that that's the dot-com boom, but we won't write that. It started to increase quite rapidly. Okay, so I feel like we've understood this. Make sure you look at the x-axis, make sure you look at the legend, understand what's going on, look at all the lines, see what they're doing individually. Now that you've understood that, we can start to plan what we're going to write. We're going to use a basic structure of a summary. We're going to look at, well, there are trends here because we're looking at a time scale over time. So we can talk about trends, increases, decreases, stability, fluctuations. We can also talk about key features as well, very briefly. And then in the third paragraph, we're going to compare those lines and we're going to use some statistics, okay? So remember that basic structure on test day. My response on test day will look like this. You can see my 3 distinct paragraphs. Let me take you through them part by part. So the first part I write is I just rewrite that description in my own words. So the original description says the graph below shows the proportion of the labor force by employment in the USA between 1930 and 2010. I wrote the given line graph represents the percentage of the American labor force that was employed in different industries between 1930 and 2010. I've written the exact same thing in terms of meaning using different words and a different structure as well, okay? That's how you start. Now I'm going to move into my overall summary, looking at main trends and key features. I said overall employment in the farming, fishing, and forestry industry decreased over the 8 decades shown, while employment in industry and technology increased gradually. Employment in sales also increased before reaching a plateau in the final decade. I've probably overused the word employment there. I could say jobs, for example. But in other words, what I've done is just described the main trends and key features there. Now I'm going to get down into the dirty business and look at the statistics. At the beginning of the period shown, farming, fishing, and forestry accounted for 70% of the US labor force. However, by 2010, this industry had decreased so dramatically that it had the lowest rates of employment at under 5%. I've just described the dark blue line. In contrast, those engaged in industrial professions in 1930 increased from 0 to account for the largest portion of the labor market in 2010 at just under 40%. Employment in the technical and sales industries mirrored each other, with both increasing steadily. However, in 2000, they began to deviate, and technical employment ended a third higher than that in sales. Employment in other services remained relatively stable. Nice. So I've dug deep. You can see that I haven't gone overboard with the statistics. I've used some statistics here. I've mentioned the years, how many times? 1, 2, 3, 4. 5 times, 4 or 5 times. Okay, so, but I've done this different ways. I've talked about halving and doubling and mirroring, and I've used some other more interesting language rather than just picking out statistics and saying, this increased by this much, this increased by this much. That's a little bit boring. I want to show off my language skills. Let's have a look at the scoring. So how are you scored on IELTS Academic Writing Task 1? Task achievement, you wrote directly about the image, you identified main features, that's the first paragraph, you compared relevant data, that's paragraph 3. You effectively used a logical structure, so that's the structure that I just showed you, and inside the paragraph, it's not just the structure accounts for the whole thing, and then within the paragraph itself, especially that third paragraph, you want to write it in such a way that it flows and it's not just different points sort of stuck in there. It says, in addition, furthermore, after this, blah, blah, blah. You want to coordinate it so it flows nicely from beginning to end. Okay? What you want to do with vocabulary is you want to use a wide range. I think I overused the word employment there. You could see that. I could have used the word jobs or work or some sort of synonym. Make sure it's a precise synonym. Make sure that the words you use are precise and accurate. Same thing with grammar. I want to use a range of different structures. So different sentence types, different ways like active sentences, passive sentences, different ways to structure my sentences so the examiner is happy, and I want to make sure that it's accurate. Cool. You can contrast this with what a 5 looks like if you want. Cool, thanks for watching. I hope that was helpful. Now you can go ahead and do the practice and you can submit an assessment if that's in your package. See ya.